I didn't realize that acceptance letter to the University of Pennsylvania would be the thing that dismantled my entire family. But standing there in our kitchen that March afternoon, watching my mother, Sarah, read the admissions packet, her face twisting into something I barely recognized, I probably should have seen it coming. "This is wonderful news, sweetheart," my father, Mark, said carefully, glancing between Sarah and me. His tone held that strained enthusiasm he used when Emily, my younger sister, and I would fight. "UPenn is a tremendous achievement." Sarah set the papers down on the granite counter, a deliberate gesture. "We need to discuss the financial reality here." She crossed her arms, her posture stiff. "Ivy League tuition isn't something we can just absorb without consequences." I'd anticipated this. My parents ran a successful accounting firm in suburban Pennsylvania, comfortable, but not wealthy. "I received a partial scholarship," I explained, pointing to the financial aid breakdown. "And I can take out loans for the rest. I've already researched work-study programs." "That's not the issue." Sarah's voice dropped, signaling a decision already made. "Your sister is starting college in 4 years. How do you think it will look if we fund an expensive private education for you, then tell Emily she has to settle for something lesser?" The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his silence more telling than any words. "Emily doesn't even know what she wants to study yet," I countered, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's in 8th grade. This is about my future, an opportunity one worked incredibly hard to earn." Sarah's expression hardened. "Everything isn't always about you, Natalie. We have to think about fairness to both our daughters. Emily already feels like she lives in your shadow academically. Imagine how she'll feel watching you go off to an elite university while knowing we can't provide the same for her." "Then tell her to work harder," I shot back, instantly regretting the harshness. "I'm sorry, but I maintained a 4.0 GPA. I captained the debate team. I volunteered every weekend at the community center. I earned this." Mark finally spoke. "No one is questioning what you've earned. We're proud of your accomplishments, but your mother has a point about the optics within the family. Your Aunt Carol has already made comments about favoritism over the years." "Aunt Carol," I scoffed, "who couldn't be bothered to show up for my high school graduation? Since when do we make major life decisions based on what judgmental relatives might think?" Sarah's face flushed. "Watch your tone. We're trying to be practical here. Penn State is an excellent state school, and with your grades, you'd likely get a full ride. You could graduate debt-free and still receive a quality education. Penn State isn't UPenn." I hated the crack in my voice, how close I was to tears. "This has been my dream since freshman year. You know that. You watched me write those essays. You drove me to campus visits." "Dreams change," Sarah said flatly. "You're 18 years old. You'll have other opportunities." The conversation quickly deteriorated. Mark tried to mediate, offering compromises that satisfied no one. Sarah became more entrenched, bringing up past grievances about my supposed selfishness that felt completely unrelated to college. When Emily came home from soccer practice and heard the shouting, she retreated to her room without a word. That night, staring at my ceiling, I made my decision: I would attend UPenn, regardless of their support. I would make it work. The following weeks became a crash course in financial planning for a desperate teenager. I met with UPenn's financial aid office, explaining my situation with as much dignity as I could. They increased my scholarship slightly and connected me with additional loan programs. I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore where I worked part-time. I researched every grant, every opportunity, every possible funding source. My parents watched these preparations with tight-lipped disapproval. They didn't forbid me from going, but their feelings were abundantly clear. "You're making a mistake that will follow you for years," Sarah warned over dinner one night. "Student debt will crush you, but you're too stubborn to listen to reason." Emily avoided me entirely. Whatever conversations she had with my parents happened behind closed doors. The few times we were alone, she looked at me like I was a stranger. The breaking point came in late May, just weeks before graduation. I came home to find both parents waiting in the living room, grim-faced. "We've made a final decision," Mark said. "If you choose UPenn over Penn State, we won't be contributing anything toward your education. Not tuition, not housing, nothing. You'll be completely on your own financially." My hands went numb. "You're cutting me off entirely." "We're establishing boundaries," Sarah corrected. "You're making an adult decision against our advice, so you can handle the adult consequences. The money we would have spent on Penn State will go into a college fund for Emily instead. That way, at least one of our daughters will graduate without being buried in debt." "This is about punishing me for not obeying you," I said quietly. "You're framing it as fairness to Emily, but she's not even applying to colleges yet. You're just angry that I won't do what you want." Mark looked away. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Think very carefully about your next steps, Natalie. This isn't just about money. If you walk away from this family's guidance, don't expect us to be waiting when things inevitably fall apart." I moved out 2 weeks after graduation. A friend's parents offered their basement at a nominal rent for the summer. My parents didn't try to stop me, didn't argue or plead. They simply watched me pack my belongings with stone-faced resignation. Emily finally spoke to me the night before I left. She appeared in my doorway as I was taping up the last box. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice small. "I never wanted them to do this to you." "I know." I sat on the edge of my bare mattress. "This isn't your fault. They're using you as an excuse, but the decision is theirs. Are you ever coming back?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "After college, I mean." I couldn't answer honestly, so I just hugged her. My first year at UPenn nearly broke me. I worked 25 hours a week at 2 different jobs while carrying a full course load. I survived on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, skipped meals more often than I'd like to admit. My roommate came from wealth I couldn't comprehend, casually mentioning family vacations to the Maldives while I was calculating if I could afford laundry that week. The contrast between my life and those around me was stark. During orientation, students casually discussed their summer homes in Nantucket, their gap year travels through Asia, their family connections to Fortune 500 companies. I smiled and nodded, offering vague responses when asked about my background. I quickly learned that my parents own an accounting firm sounded more impressive than the reality of being completely financially cut off. My first job was at the campus bookstore, shelving textbooks and ringing up purchases for students whose parents had given them unlimited credit cards. The irony of watching someone spend $400 on books without blinking while I was eating plain rice wasn't lost on me. My second job came through a work-study placement in the admissions office, stuffing envelopes and answering phones from prospective students and their eager parents. Those calls were particularly challenging. I'd listen to mothers and fathers asking detailed questions about financial aid, campus life, academic support systems, their voices filled with pride. They wanted to ensure their child would thrive, be supported, have every opportunity to succeed. Some conversations left me needing to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I'd splash cold water on my face and remind myself to breathe. But I thrived academically. Business school suited me in ways I hadn't anticipated. My professors noticed my work ethic, my willingness to push beyond the minimum requirements. I joined organizations, worked relentlessly, applied for every competitive opportunity that crossed my desk. Professor Eleanor Vance became an unexpected mentor during my freshman spring semester. She taught corporate finance and had a reputation for being demanding but fair. After I'd submitted a particularly detailed analysis of a company's capital structure, she asked me to stay after class. "This work is exceptional," she said, tapping my paper. "Especially for a freshman. Most students at this level are still grasping basic concepts, but you're already thinking several steps ahead." "Thank you," I managed, and used to such direct praise. I'm curious about your background. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with sharp eyes. You have a practical understanding of financial constraints that most of my students lack. It shows in how you approach problems. I hesitated, then offered a carefully edited version. I'm funding my education mostly independently. It gives me a different perspective on resource allocation. Professor Vance nodded slowly. I see. Well, that perspective is valuable. I'm running a research project this summer on small business financing challenges. It doesn't pay much, but it would give you experience and look excellent on your resume. Interested? That research position changed my trajectory. The work was intellectually challenging, exposing me to real-world business problems that textbooks only touched on superficially. Professor Vance introduced me to professionals in her network, expanded my understanding of how finance operated beyond classroom theory. By the end of summer, I had a published paper with my name on it and connections that would prove invaluable later. But the isolation was crushing at times. Watching other students video call their families during stressful exam periods. Seeing care packages arrive filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. Overhearing casual mentions of parents flying in for Parents' Weekend. Each instance was a small reminder of what I'd lost, or perhaps what I'd never really had. Meanwhile, the narrative back home was apparently very different. I learned this through mutual acquaintances from high school who still followed me on social media. According to them, my parents were telling everyone that I had abandoned the family to chase prestige, that I was too proud to accept their reasonable concerns about debt, that I had caused Emily emotional distress with my selfishness. Jessica Adams, who'd been in my AP Literature class senior year, sent me a message during winter break of my freshman year. We hadn't been particularly close, but she'd always been kind. Hey, I hope this isn't overstepping, her message read, but I ran into your mom at the grocery store yesterday. She seemed really upset and mentioned you weren't coming home for the holidays. She made it sound like you'd cut them off completely. I just wanted to check that you're okay. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thanks for checking in. The situation is complicated, but I'm doing well at school. Hope you're enjoying your break. Jessica's response came quickly. I figured there was more to the story. Your mom has been telling people that you refused all their help and support because you wanted to prove something. It didn't sound like the person I knew in high school. You were always practical and thoughtful. That conversation opened a door I'd been trying to keep closed. Jessica mentioned that Sarah had been particularly vocal at community events, positioning herself as the worried parent of a wayward child who'd rejected family values. Mark apparently said less but didn't contradict her narrative when others expressed sympathy. The manipulation was subtle but effective. They'd framed themselves as reasonable parents offering sensible advice, rejected by a stubborn daughter too proud to accept guidance. The part where they'd issued an ultimatum and cut me off entirely? Somehow, that detail never made it into their version of events. My Aunt Carol, predictably, had plenty to say on Facebook. Her posts dripped with passive-aggressive concern about young people who think they're too good for their roots and the importance of family values over materialistic ambitions. Sarah liked every single comment. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself publicly or privately. I simply kept my head down and worked harder. Sophomore year brought changes beyond the obvious financial improvement. I'd learned to navigate upend's social landscape, finding my people among other scholarship students and those who had chosen to work rather than rely solely on family money. We formed our own community, sharing resources and support systems that wealthier students took for granted. There was Kevin, a pre-med student from rural Wyoming who worked overnight shifts at a hospital and somehow still maintained a near-perfect GPA. There was Chloe, an engineering major whose single mother cleaned houses to help supplement what financial aid didn't cover. There was Ethan, a computer science student who taught himself programming to freelance during high school and now took on projects between classes. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation, the exhaustion that went beyond normal college stress, the constant calculations, could we afford to go out with classmates, or would that money be better saved for textbooks? The particular shame of wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation while everyone else seemed to have unlimited wardrobe options. You going home for Thanksgiving? Chloe asked one evening as we studied together in the library. No family to go home to, I said simply. I'd learned that directness prevented follow-up questions. She nodded. Same. My mom can't afford the plane ticket, and I picked up extra shifts that week anyway. Kevin's staying too. We were thinking of doing a Thanksgiving dinner in his dorm kitchen. You in? That Thanksgiving, surrounded by other students who understood what it meant to build family from choice rather than obligation, I felt less alone than I had in months. We pulled our limited resources, cooked an imperfect but heartfelt meal, shared stories about the paths that had brought us to UPenn. Nobody's parents called during dinner. Nobody had to excuse themselves to take a guilt-inducing phone call about how much we were missed. It was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. The consulting internship I landed sophomore year came through Professor Vance's network. She'd recommended me for a competitive program that paid substantially more than typical internships, targeting students who demonstrated both academic excellence and financial need. The application required extensive documentation of my situation, which meant acknowledging on paper the reality I usually kept private. Writing that essay forced me to confront feelings I'd been suppressing. I outlined the ultimatum my parents had given me, the choice between their financial support and my educational goals, and the complete severance that followed. I explained the work schedule I maintained, the meals I'd skipped, the constant stress of wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. But I also wrote about what I'd gained, the self-reliance that came from solving problems without a safety net, the clarity that came from knowing my achievements were entirely my own, the understanding that resilience wasn't just an abstract concept but something built through daily choices to keep moving forward despite exhaustion and doubt. The program director called me personally to offer the position. "Your essay was remarkable," she said. Not because of the hardship, unfortunately, many talented students face similar circumstances, but because of how clearly you articulated both the costs and the growth. That level of self-awareness is rare at any age. The internship that summer was transformative. I worked at a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago, analyzing business operations for clients ranging from tech startups to established manufacturing companies. The work was intellectually demanding, requiring me to quickly absorb information about industries I knew nothing about and identify strategic opportunities or risks. My supervisor, Daniel Lee, had built his career from similarly humble beginnings. During our first one-on-one meeting, he shared his own story of putting himself through business school while working full-time, graduating with debt that had taken 15 years to pay off. But it was worth it, he said, because I never had to wonder if my success was mine, or just a reflection of family connections and wealth. Daniel became an informal mentor, offering advice that went beyond our projects. He taught me how to navigate professional environments where most people had very different backgrounds, how to build credibility through work rather than pedigree, how to advocate for myself in salary negotiations and career advancement conversations. The biggest mistake people in our situation make, he told me over coffee one afternoon, is thinking we need to be twice as good to get half as far. That mindset breeds resentment and burnout. Instead, focus on being excellent at what you do and building relationships with people who value competence over connections. Those people exist, even in industries that seem dominated by nepotism. The firm liked me enough to bring me back the following summer. By junior year, I had enough saved that I wasn't living in constant financial panic. I could occasionally buy new clothes, could sometimes say yes when friends suggested dinner out, could stop calculating the cost per use of every potential purchase. Through it all, my parents maintained radio silence. No calls, no emails, nothing. Emily and I texted occasionally, brief exchanges that avoided mentioning our parents entirely. She told me about high school drama and college applications in carefully neutral language. I asked about her interests and avoided discussing my own life beyond surface pleasantries. The distance between Emily and me felt like collateral damage I couldn't prevent. She was still living under their roof, still dependent on their support and approval. I couldn't expect her to choose sides when doing so would have made her daily life unbearable. But the loss of that relationship, watching my little sister grow up through pixelated selfies and brief text updates, added another layer of grief to everything else. During my junior year spring break, when most students went home or on elaborate vacations, I stayed in the city and picked up freelance consulting work. I was in my dorm room late one evening when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but that had my hometown area code. Natalie? The voice was tentative, young. It's Emily. My heart jumped. Are you okay? Is everything all right? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm calling from my friend Samantha's phone. Mom and Dad don't know. She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. I'm applying to colleges, and I need to talk to someone honest. Everyone else just tells me what they think I want to hear, or what Mom and Dad want me to do. We talked for over 2 hours. Emily confessed that the pressure at home had become suffocating. Every grade, every extracurricular activity, every decision was fraught with anxiety about whether it was enough, whether she was living up to expectations that seemed to shift constantly. Sarah critiqued her college essays obsessively, rewriting passages until they no longer sounded like Emily's voice. Mark questioned every school on her list, worried about rankings and prestige and what extended family would think. They keep saying they just want what's best for me, Emily said, her voice cracking. But it feels like they want me to be perfect in ways that prove they were right about everything. Like if I succeed on their terms, it somehow justifies what happened with you. You're not responsible for fixing their mistakes, I told her gently. Whatever you choose, make sure it's actually your choice. Not what they want, not what you think will make them happy or prove a point. What do you actually want? The question seemed to stump her. After a long silence, she admitted, I don't know anymore. I used to have ideas, but they got lost somewhere along the way. That conversation haunted me for weeks. My parents had learned nothing from their experience with me. They were making the same mistakes with Emily, just with different tactics, smothering control instead of withdrawal, but ultimately the same inability to trust their child's judgment or respect her autonomy. I wanted to intervene, to call them and articulate everything wrong with their approach. But I knew from experience that they wouldn't hear it. They'd convinced themselves that their parenting philosophy was sound, that I was the aberration rather than their methods being flawed. Emily would have to find her own path, just as I had. My junior year also brought an unexpected research grant that covered most of my remaining tuition. The grant was specifically for students studying the intersection of business ethics and social impact, and my proposal examined how companies could build sustainable practices while maintaining profitability. Professor Vance had encouraged me to apply, even helping me refine the proposal through multiple drafts. You have something many of my students lack, she told me during one of our working sessions. You understand viscerally that decisions have consequences, that resources are finite, that choices require trade-offs. Most of them have been insulated from those realities by wealth and privilege. It makes your analysis more grounded, more realistic. The grant didn't just provide financial relief, it validated that my perspective had value. The experiences that had felt like purely negative burdens, the struggles and sacrifices and constant calculations, had actually developed skills and insights that set me apart professionally. What my parents had framed as my mistake was becoming my greatest asset. The full scope of my parents' hypocrisy didn't become clear until Emily's senior year of high school. She caught me one night crying so hard I could barely understand her words. They caught me, she sobbed. Someone reported me, and now everything is ruined. It took 20 minutes to piece together the story. Emily, overwhelmed by the pressure to maintain grades for college applications, had been paying a classmate, Liam, to write her English papers. Not just editing or tutoring, but actually purchasing completed essays and submitting them as her own work. She'd done it for over a year, dozens of assignments. A teacher had grown suspicious about the dramatic difference between her in-class writing and her homework submissions. An investigation followed. The evidence was irrefutable. "What did Mom and Dad say?" I asked, my stomach churning. "That's why I'm calling you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They hired a lawyer. A really expensive one. He's arguing that the school didn't follow proper procedures, that there's not enough proof, all this technical stuff. They're fighting the expulsion." I sat down heavily on my dorm bed. "They're defending this. She cheated, Emily. You cheated repeatedly." "I know." Her anguish was palpable through the phone. "I told them I deserved the consequences, that I wanted to own up to it. But they said colleges don't need to know if we handle this correctly. The lawyer thinks he can get it reduced to a suspension without it going on my permanent record." "How much is this lawyer costing them?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I heard Dad tell Mom it would be around $30,000 by the time everything is finished. Maybe more if it goes to formal hearings." The same parents who claimed they couldn't afford to help me at UPenn without creating unfairness were now spending that amount or more to cover up my sister's academic dishonesty. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. The situation with Emily consumed my thoughts for days. I oscillated between anger at my parents' spectacular hypocrisy and concern for my sister, who was clearly struggling under pressure she couldn't handle. I'd lived through their particular brand of conditional support and knew exactly how it could warp a person's decision-making, create desperation that led to terrible choices. But there was also a part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, that felt vindicated. For years, they positioned themselves as the responsible parents making tough but necessary decisions about fairness and financial prudence. They told everyone who would listen that I was reckless, that my choices would lead to disaster, that they were simply trying to protect me from myself. Now the mask had slipped. Their actions revealed what I'd suspected all along. This had never been about money or fairness. It was about control, about their ego, about wanting children who reflected well on them rather than children who made autonomous choices they disagreed with. When I'd refused to comply, they punished me. When Emily made an actual mistake that threatened their image, they threw resources at making it disappear. "What do you want me to do?" I asked carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I feel disgusting," Emily said miserably. "Everyone at school knows. Even if the lawyer gets me off technically, everyone knows what I did. And Mom keeps saying this is somehow connected to the stress I experienced from your situation. Like you leaving created this trauma that made me desperate." My hand tightened around the phone. "She's blaming me for you cheating. She's blaming everyone except me, honestly. The teacher who reported it, the school for having unclear policies, you for creating family tension. I'm apparently just a victim of circumstances." Bitterness crept into her voice. "I'm so tired, Natalie. I'm tired of being treated like I'm fragile, like I can't handle reality. You were right about them." The conversation shifted then. We talked not just about the immediate crisis, but about patterns that had existed for years. Dynamics I'd been too close to see clearly when I lived at home. Emily described how after I'd left, she'd become the sole focus of their ambitions and anxieties. Every achievement was examined for what it said about their parenting. Every setback was treated as a catastrophic failure that required intervention. "They hired a tutor for me last year," Emily explained, "even though I was getting solid B's in the class. Mom said B's weren't good enough for top-tier colleges. The tutor would work with me for 2 hours every Sunday, and then Mom would quiz me afterward to make sure I'd absorbed everything. It was exhausting." "Is that when you started cheating?" I asked gently. "Yeah." Her voice went small. "I couldn't keep up with what they expected. The tutor helped my test scores but didn't do homework with me, and I was spending so much time on their priorities that I didn't have energy left for regular assignments. This kid in my class, Liam, he'd been advertising his services kind of quietly. It seemed like the only way to survive. But you understand that wasn't the only option, right? I needed her to grasp this. You could have told them the pressure was too much. You could have accepted B's. You could have applied to schools that matched your actual performance rather than their aspirations. I know that now. She was crying again. But in the moment, disappointing them felt impossible. After watching what happened with you, how completely they cut you out, I was terrified of making them angry. So, I made myself perfect instead. Or at least I made it look like I was perfect. We talked through her options. I encouraged her to be honest about her role, to take responsibility regardless of what the lawyer managed to negotiate. I reminded her that character wasn't about never making mistakes, but about how you handled them afterward. She listened in a way that suggested she'd been starving for someone to speak plainly to her without agenda or image management. Are you going to tell them, Emily asked nervously, about the lawyer and the money? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to throw it in their faces, make them confront their own double standards, but honestly, I doubt they'd even see it. They've constructed a narrative where everything they do is justified, and everything I did was selfish. Facts that contradict that narrative just get ignored or reinterpreted. That's exactly what they do, Emily said quietly. I see it now. I think I've always seen it, but I couldn't admit it because then I'd have to admit our whole family is kind of broken. After we hung up, I lay awake thinking about trajectory and choices. I'd chosen independence and struggle over compliance and comfort. Emily had chosen compliance and discovered it came with its own impossible costs. Neither path had been easy, but at least mine had been honest. At least my achievements, however hard-won, were genuinely mine. The lawyer did his job. Through some combination of procedural technicalities and aggressive negotiation, Emily's expulsion became a 3-week suspension. The cheating never appeared on her official transcript. She graduated on time, her GPA intact, her record clean to any college that came asking. She didn't apply to elite schools. According to her, she chose a small liberal arts college in Vermont that emphasized character development and personal growth. According to her parents' version that filtered back through relatives, she was so traumatized by family challenges that she needed a nurturing environment to heal. I graduated from UPenn that May with honors and multiple job offers. I accepted a position at a prestigious investment firm in Chicago, a starting salary that made my parents' accounting income look modest. I didn't send them an announcement. I didn't invite them to graduation. They had made their choice years earlier, and I had made mine in response. The first crack in their narrative came from an unexpected source. My grandma, my father's mother, had remained quietly neutral throughout the family drama. She sent birthday cards to both Emily and me, never taking sides publicly. But after my graduation, she posted a photo on Facebook that I hadn't known existed. It was from my high school graduation, me in my cap and gown, holding my UPenn acceptance letter. Her caption read, "For years ago, my brilliant granddaughter chose courage over comfort. Today, she graduated from an Ivy League university debt-free through her own merit and determination. Some bridges are burned by the people too afraid to cross them. Proud doesn't begin to cover it." The post detonated like a bomb in our extended family social media circles. Relatives who had accepted my parents' version of events suddenly had questions. Why had I gone to UPenn alone? What did chose courage over comfort mean? Why wasn't I in any family photos from the past 4 years? My Aunt Carol, never one to miss drama, commented asking Grandma to clarify her cryptic message. Grandma responded with characteristic bluntness, "Ask your brother why he chose to fund a lawyer for academic dishonesty but not his other daughter's legitimate education. Ask him about choices." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Family members started comparing notes, reconstructing the timeline. The truth emerged in pieces: my parents' ultimatum, their financial support for Emily's legal defense, the way they'd spun my independence as abandonment. My mother, Sarah, called me for the first time in 4 years. I was in my new apartment unpacking boxes in my free time between starting my job. I almost didn't answer. You had no right to involve your grandmother in private family matters, she said without preamble. She has completely misconstrued the situation, and now we have relatives calling with accusations and judgments. I didn't involve her in anything, I replied calmly. She made her own observations based on publicly available information. Maybe the issue is that the truth doesn't match the story you've been telling. There is no story. Her voice rose sharply. We made a difficult decision based on financial realities and family fairness. Just because it didn't align with your ambitions doesn't mean we were wrong. You spent $30,000 on a lawyer to help Emily avoid consequences for cheating, I said flatly. That's more than a year of tuition at Penn State. Don't insult my intelligence by claiming this was ever about money or fairness. The line went silent for several seconds. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something almost pleading. Your sister made a mistake. She was under enormous pressure. We were protecting her future, and I was trying to build mine, I countered. But my future apparently wasn't worth protecting. My achievements weren't worth celebrating. My dreams weren't worth supporting. You made your priorities very clear. That's not fair. She sounded on the verge of tears now. We were trying to do right by both of you. We didn't want Emily to feel less than. So, you made sure I felt less than instead. You said you chose her comfort over my opportunity, then blamed me for choosing myself when you abandoned me. You don't get to be upset that people finally know the truth. Natalie, please. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Can we meet? Can we try to work through this like adults? You're angry, and maybe you have reasons, but we're still family. I'll think about it, I lied. I need to go. I have an early meeting tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through my system. For years of suppressed anger and hurt threatened to overwhelm me in that moment. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply returned to unpacking, building the life I had fought so hard to create. My father, Mark, reached out next, an email rather than a call. It was longer, more thoughtful, attempting to explain their perspective with a nuance Sarah hadn't managed. He acknowledged mistakes, admitted that perhaps they had let their own anxieties about appearances influence their decisions. He noted that I had proven them wrong about the risks of debt, that my success was evident and deserved. But even his apology contained qualifications. Phrases like, "We did what we thought was best at the time," and "it's easy to judge in hindsight" peppered the text. He wanted reconciliation, but he also wanted understanding for choices he still fundamentally believed were reasonable. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with the email for days, rereading it periodically, trying to find genuine accountability beneath the self-justification. Meanwhile, the family drama continued to unfold at a distance. Emily called to apologize for everything, crying through her confession that she had always known their treatment of me was wrong, but had been too scared to speak up. She was in therapy now, working through the guilt and the complicated dynamics of our upbringing. She wanted a relationship with me separate from our parents, if I was willing. That conversation was different. Emily owned her part without deflection, acknowledged how she had benefited from their favoritism, even when it made her uncomfortable. We talked about rebuilding trust, slowly, carefully. By the end of summer, I had established firm boundaries. I responded to my father's email with a brief acknowledgement that I had received it, but wasn't ready for deeper conversation. I told both parents that I needed space and time, that any future relationship would have to be built on honest recognition of what had happened, not revised narratives that centered their intentions over impact. My success at work became its own statement. I received early promotions, recognition from senior partners. Opportunities that validated every sacrifice I'd made. When business publications featured emerging talent in finance, my name appeared alongside people from far more privileged backgrounds. The girl who'd eaten ramen for months and worked retail between classes now sat in boardrooms advising major corporations. I didn't send clippings to my parents. I didn't post triumphantly on social media. I simply lived well, achieved goals, built a career that spoke for itself. Relatives occasionally tried to intervene, suggesting that life was too short for estrangement, that forgiveness was important. I listened politely and changed the subject. This wasn't about holding grudges or refusing forgiveness. This was about refusing to pretend that profound betrayal was simply a misunderstanding that everyone should move past for the sake of awkward holiday gatherings. The final twist came almost a year after graduation. Emily forwarded me an email chain she had accidentally been included on between our parents and Aunt Carol. In it, Sarah complained bitterly about how my stubbornness had damaged the family's reputation, how I was punishing them for one decision they'd made years ago, how I was being vindictive by refusing to participate in family events. Aunt Carol's response was unexpectedly sharp. She pointed out that they had made numerous decisions over several years, that cutting off financial support entirely went beyond setting boundaries, that financing legal defense of cheating while claiming poverty about legitimate education expenses revealed troubling priorities. Sarah's reply devolved into defensive justifications, insisting that context mattered, that I had always been difficult and ungrateful, that Emily was sensitive in ways I never was and needed more protection. Reading those emails crystallized something for me. They still didn't understand. They genuinely believed they were the wronged party. That my refusal to reconcile on their terms was the real injury here. So, I stopped waiting for the apology that would never come. I stopped hoping they would eventually recognize the full weight of what they'd done. I accepted that some relationships are irreconcilable, not because of a lack of love, but because of fundamental incompatibility in values and accountability. I built my life without them. I mentored younger professionals who reminded me of my desperate 18-year-old self. I donated to scholarship funds for first-generation college students. I showed up for Emily when she needed support navigating her own path separate from parental expectations. And when people asked about my family, I told the truth simply: we're not close. They made choices I couldn't accept, and I made choices they couldn't support. Sometimes that's how it goes. The revenge wasn't dramatic. There was no public confrontation, no satisfying moment of vindication where they begged for forgiveness. The revenge was quieter and more complete. It was building the exact life they said would destroy me. It was succeeding without their approval or support. It was refusing to minimize my own worth to make them comfortable with their decisions. It was the fact that their narrative crumbled under the weight of objective reality. That relatives who once judged me as selfish now understood the fuller picture. That Emily found her own voice and chose honesty over complicity. My success spoke volumes they could never silence. Every promotion, every recognition, every milestone became evidence that their assessment of my choices was wrong. Not just incorrect, but fundamentally wrong about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. I didn't need them to admit it. The truth was visible to anyone paying attention. Sometimes the best way to get even is simply refusing to let other people's limitations define your potential. It's choosing yourself when no one else will, then proving through lived experience that you were right to do so. They wanted me to fail as justification for their choices. They needed my struggle to validate their warnings. My thriving made their entire narrative collapse. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where proving someone wrong was the only way to prove yourself right?